Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Jedi, also known as Caesar the Crowd Pleaser. That's right, and for this week on episode 35, we are on the precipice of the release of Flames of Xulta. That's right, the next set 7. And with that, we finally received the 5th mechanic, which means I get to do my Flames of Xulta mechanics breakdown and number crunch. So, welcome everyone, one and all, to episode 35 of Eternal Journey. So, before we get into it, I want to go ahead and mention the YouTube channel. That is EJthePodcast or Eternal Journey on the search engine. That's right, that will take you to my YouTube channel. I put quite a bit of content on there. I've actually been upping the upload rate. Yeah, that's great English. Where you guys might actually see up to 3 and 4 videos a week on there. So get in while the getting's good. Been posting a lot of the Flames of Xulta preview drafts, and then once it releases on Monday, this coming Monday, the 7th, I will be posting videos of the new formats. Don't miss out. Let me make the mistakes for you. So check that out once again at EJ the Podcast on YouTube. This moves us right into our subscriber shout out section of the podcast. So first up, our subs. Want to go ahead and send out a special thanks to all our resubs, including Chastity Weaver, that recently on the last stream just resubbed for 5 months. She's 1 month away from getting the Darth Maul lightsaber, which honestly I am super excited about. So thank you, Chastity, for the sub, and thank you to all my other resubs, all faithful. I think there's 21 of you guys out now, which is absolutely amazing. Thank you guys so much. Next up, we want to go ahead and say a thank you to a couple of cheers I received this week in streams. First, want to shout out Banana Skunk, Old Loser Gamer, and It's Buridan. Thank you guys so much for the cheers. Really appreciate the bits and the triangles and the weird shapes and the pudding and the jello pudding. Yeah, you guys are great. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. All right, a couple off-topic shout-outs. Want to give a shout-out to Celtic Guardian, or Celtic 7 Guardian, or Celtic Guardian 7, however you find it, for personally helping me out with the Eternal Cube. That's right, guys. I will get into it again at the end of the show, but we put together an Eternal Cube, which we will be drafting on my Sunday stream, the Sunday before, i.e. the 6th, which is the Sunday before the release of Flames of Xulta. So if you're interested in that, definitely tune in to my stream. It will be earlier that day. I normally stream at 10 a.m. my time, but I'll probably be getting on closer to about 7:30, 8 o'clock my time to incorporate that. So be on the lookout for that if you guys are interested. Would love to have you be part of that. So thank you again, Celtic Guardian 7. Shout out to That Resolves, which is another YouTube channel you guys should check out. He has been doing content for Eternal for quite a long time now. I need to owe him a shout out because he was extremely appreciative. It turns out that he calls his videos Eternal Journey, and I had no idea. I didn't even know he existed, to be completely honest with you. For some reason, when I went looking for Eternal content, he did not show up. But yeah, he actually calls him Eternal Journey, and he was kind enough to allow me to continue using Eternal Journey. So shout out to him, and go check out his channel. Give him a follow. Anyone that develops content for Eternal is great, so give them or him a shout out and some follow. All right, want to mention the Misplay Podcast, Mark and Patrick over there, or Jason. I'm sorry, Mark and Jason. I apologize. They are absolutely phenomenal. They're huge. I mean, content creators for this community are so great. Like, they constantly are putting out things and trying to better the community. And the Misplay Podcast is no slouch on this either. They recently worked on creating an Eternal survey for the players, and it was not only stickied by the admins of the Eternal Discord, but also pushed by the Eternal Warcry people as a sticker or banner. So they made a pretty elaborate survey that covers multiple avenues or areas of Eternal Ants Gaming, and we highly encourage for you to go on there on the Reddit and click the link, or obviously at the Misplay website, and take that survey, because that information is not only valuable to the community and to the Misplay podcast gents, or the two guys in a basement recording, as they so dubbed themselves, now copyrighted or trademarked, but also for Eternal to use, or Direwolf Digital. So definitely it doesn't take long. You can do it in under 5 minutes. Go out there and fill it out, and it really will help the community in some form or fashion. That being said, I want to give a shout out to EJthePodcast for the awesome 600 plus person raid. Thank you so much, EJthePodcast. I really do appreciate that. So shout out to him. Throw a couple of follows and subscribes his way. Phenomenal guy for the community. Been creating content for I think closed beta, and to this day is the only streamer able to purchase the build a card option on the Influence store. And then of course Zirben for the other raid. Thank you so much, Zirben, one of the early followers of this channel. So it's always great to have him starting up his own channel, as well as throwing some love our way. But that's going to do it for shoutouts, guys. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you guys bearing through it. I think it is extremely important to acknowledge all the people that help support this great community of ours. And so I don't mind taking the time to do it. For those either fast forward up to the pack one, pick one, or the main topic, I completely understand. But hopefully every once in a while you do take a peek in here. And who knows, maybe one day I will give a shout out to your name, which I would love to do. I'm hesitant. I would like to shout out every sub I get, and I'm probably, you know what, maybe I will start doing that. Giving a shout out to all my subs, period, while I'm still small and able to do so. Maybe one day if I get to a point where it's like 200 subs, I won't be able to, but for right now I probably will start doing that. But thank you guys so much. So that's the shout out portion, which moves us into our pack one, pick one. And needless to say, this is our last pack one, pick one of Dark Frontier. Bon voyage. I don't think I will be doing a sunset show, only because I feel like this format was somewhat, or well, actually shoot, I guess we received 2 formats of Dark Frontier, 3 if you count Dark Frontier, then the modification with the revamp, and then obviously this little mini format. But I think that's a little too much, a little oversaturation of, and really things for as far as Dark Frontier go has not changed. So this will be our last pack one, pick one. So let's go ahead and start with the commons. We have Displaced Aroctodon. I like that one. I think it's a great 2-drop. Sometimes helps you hit your power, sometimes shuffles away power. So yeah, I like it. We have Granite Coin, Cobalt Coin. Coins are fine, but I'm definitely not first picking it. Direwolf Lurker just seems too slow most of the time. The lifesteal is nice in some cases, but once again, not a first pick. We have Winnow, Fend Off, which I am slightly higher on, thanks to Celtic Guardian 7. I do like running at least one in my deck if I am in Primal. Haven't gotten to the point where I'm running 2 just yet, but 1 seems to fit quite well. Guns A-Blazing not working, and Omnivorous Vorlunk. It's a tough one between the 2/2 and the Vorlunk, but I think at the end of the day, even the Vorlunk being double primal, I do like the fact that it's kind of Time's version of removal, so I'd probably take the Vorlunk when it comes to the commons. Going into the uncommons though, we have Practice Insignia. Not fixing this early, not having the slightest idea, even though I do like Time in this format. Cobra seems to be the strongest color combination or faction combination in this preview format, if you will. Seeing a lot of people throwing up some serious numbers, but I would be interested to see what the boys over at Farming Eternal say once they get their spreadsheet. We have Touch of Grace, which has come up a little bit for me because of how effective metal is. I am actually kind of okay paying the 1 additional power for this thing to have warp, because really in most cases you're not really upset about playing it. And then finally we have Still Weave Shroud, which is the +1/+2 weapon at uncommon for 3 at a time, and summon silence an enemy unit. I actually am way high on this card because of the fact that removal has gone down, flyers have gone up, and there is Exalted in packs 2 and 3. And let me tell you, that mechanic is extremely hard to play around in limited. So being able to increase the health of one of your bigger units, one of your overwhelm units, one of your flyers, or one of your twist unit is extremely useful, and the silence effect is almost irreplaceable. So yeah, still weave Shroud, you'd be the one. Our rare is a smuggler. It is the Send Waste Smuggler, or the Stone Scar, which is a 3/2 merchant. Its special ability is Shift 3. It costs 3, and a red and a shadow. Yeah, I'm lower on the smugglers, especially in pack 1. Pick 1. Not much to say about that. So yep, Steel Weave Shroud, you are the one, and you will be our last pick. Pack 1, pick 1 from Dark Frontier. Thank you so much for being here. All right, guys, that is going to do it for all our preliminary stuff. So let's jump right into our main topic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our main topic for this show, as previously stated, is the mechanics breakdown for the new Flames of Xulta set that comes out this Monday. I'll try to cover these in the order they were released for no particular reason. So first up is Mastery, which as far as I can tell is represented in all 5 colors. So if you're following along at home, I am on the actual Direwolf page. I'm going to go over some of the interesting parts of this. Granted, I tried my best to test out these mechanics in the most recent preview event, but I do still have a couple of questions myself that I might throw out there, and we'll see. But I will try to set you guys up for success to the best of my ability. So reading off of the page, Mastery is a new keyword that rewards successfully dealing damage and surviving. That is important. When Relentless Combatant deals 8 damage, so the Relentless Combatant is a 2/3 warrior at common for 4 red. It has Berserk and has Mastery 8 +2/+2. So when Relentless Combatant deals 8 damage, she gets a permanent +2/+2. Maybe it takes you 4 attacks to do 2 damage each, or perhaps you throw a +2/+1 heavy axe on her first and do a Berserk attack and get it in just 1 turn. So let's continue reading. Let's get into some of the deeper details of how Mastery works. 1. A unit achieves Mastery when it deals total damage equal to its Mastery number. What this means is, so let's go a little bit earlier real quick. I might cover it again, but since we mentioned it as well, the unit has to deal damage and survive. So if, for example, if you use the previous example of the Relentless Combatant, there's a 2/3. If it tussles with a 3/3, it will not get the 2 damage trigger on its Mastery before it dies. It will die with no Mastery trigger. So the unit does have to survive combat. The flip side to that, should it attack into a 1/3 and they bounce off each other, then the Relentless Combatant will get the +2 the +2 out of 8 to its Mastery. Hitting face works as well as armor. Okay. So once again, for that one specifically, it has to deal 8 damage total, doesn't care how. Next up, number 2, you don't need to deal the damage all at once. You can do it over multiple attacks. Whenever you reach the Mastery number, you'll get the Mastery bonus immediately. So once again, as it stated in the example, you can attack 4 times with this guy, deal 2, 2, 2, and 2, eventually leading up to 8. And as soon as it's done dealing the damage, it will get the +2/+2. Granted, combat damage is dealt all in one time, so it's not one of those things where, you know, you're attacking, it deals damage, etc. I'm getting too deep into it. That's like magic stuff. So however it deals the 8 damage is all it cares about. So like I said in the example, you can go as far as 2 a turn. If you manage to, for example, pump it up with, let's say you deal 2 and 2, so it's at 4, and then you pump it with like a finest hour, so it's a 5/6. Then when it will deal 5 damage, they'll put it over the Mastery and it will gain the Mastery. Okay, it won't wait until the end of turn. Is what they're trying to say. When your units make progress toward Mastery, it keeps that progress even if it changes zones, like being bounced by a teleport or killed by a death strike. So it's pretty straightforward. If you manage to hit 2 times, So it has 4 mastery on it, or 4 mastery triggers, or however 4 out of 8. And your opponent bounces it. When it comes back into play, it'd still have the 4. If it died and you immortalize it or dark return it, it will still have the 4 on it. Sounds pretty self-explanatory. Then we have the next one, but the unit only gains mastery if it deals damage and survives. If your relentless combatant attacks and dies from being blocked, it will not gain mastery from the damage of that attack. So much like I stated earlier, it just has to survive any kind of ways, casting a metal on it so it doesn't receive combat damage, things like that. All quick draw will allow it to deal the damage and not die, but it must survive. That being said, obviously, if they death strike it after it's still damaged, the damage will still happen. Unless it's obviously, like we said previously during blocks, like if someone blocks and then they death strike it, then obviously it will not get it because it did not deal damage. Let's see. Next one, mastery works when blocking 2. You can gain mastery when blocking, when making a killer attack, or any other time your unit would deal damage and survive. And yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. It doesn't matter how it deals damage as long as the unit dealt damage. So for example, trying to think, I know hold under does not, but for example, I think Frost Breath, Dragon's Breath. If you guys remember that card where it exhausted a unit and that unit deals damage equal to its power or attack to another unit, that would actually trigger the mastery because of the fact that it says the unit deals the damage. Killer is pretty straightforward. That unit is specifically attacking another unit, so the damage will still happen. And then obviously blocking. The Oni Stalwart is a 1/4 that has mastery as well, and that one does a great job. Let me see if it's in here. It did not. That does a fantastic job of gaining its mastery because it also has endurance, so it can attack, deal the 1 damage, and slowly but surely work its way up there on defense as well. Finally, similar to Ultimate, mastery can refresh if your unit leaves play and returns later. Say your relentless combatant dies after it got mastery bonus of +2/+2. If you bring her back later with last chance, it will still be a 4/5, but now it will have another mastery 8 get a +2/+2 ready to complete. So what this means is, much like we talked about, if you bounce it to save it from removal, if it dies and you bring it back, all those great things, then it is able to reset the mastery, much like an ultimate. So you can totally get in with this deal, or pretty much they already said it, so I'm not going to go into depth. Let's continue on. Not all mastery bonuses buff your units. Thunderclaw Raven delivers a special gift. The Thunderclaw Raven is a 2/1 for bird at common for 3 and a blue. It says flying, mastery 6, draw a curse of your choice from your deck. So as we stated now, it's just going over the fact that not all of them are going to be specifically stat bonuses. It's just a matter of when X unit, or when specific unit deals X amount of damage, a certain ability will happen. Typically, it looks like it's, from the looks of the cards so far released at the common uncommon level, it looks like it's going to be a lot of just stat adjustments. But much like they just showed at the common level, this one draws you a card. Let's see what else it says. Thunderclaw Raven Swords of Position mastery units appear in all 5 factions, so there's lots of sweet mastery prizes. All right, so I stated that earlier. It is spread across all 5 factions, so it's not a faction specific type thing. Let's see what else. Mastery can appear on weapons as well. Behold the Sword of Judgment. Sword of Judgment is the +1/+1 weapon at uncommon for 4. Mastery 5, the weapon itself gets a +4/+4. So this is quite strong, believe it or not. I will go more in depth into it in the set review. That is going to be the next one that comes up. But for right now, we're okay just mentioning that it is quite powerful and something to look out for. That being said, notice that the mastery for weapons, I will say this, coincides with the unit. So Sword of Judgment is a +1/+1. That doesn't mean that the sword is doing 1 damage a turn. If you slap this on a 4/4 and the unit is a 5/5, when it deals damage, the mastery on the sword will identify that did 5 damage and immediately trigger the +4/+4. Of note that if you slap the Sword of Judgment on a unit that has mastery, they both trigger equally. So if we slap it on for example, the Thunderclaw, and you swing, the Thunderclaw Raven will get 3 triggers towards its mastery, so 3 of 6, and the Sword of Judgment will get its trigger as well, going to 3 of 5. Okay, if that makes any sense. And then of course, let's see, then some units might also have multiple masteries, which we've seen in the form of Interloper. I forgot the name of it now, I do apologize. But let's look at this legendary that they have, which is Akko Inspired Artist. Akko Inspired Artist is a 1/1 legendary Oni for 1 and a red. It says Mastery 1, play a +1/+2 weapon on Akko. So it becomes a 2/3. Then it has Mastery 9, units and weapons in your deck get a +4/+2 and overwhelm. So what this means is, to break this card down, as soon as it deals 1 damage, it will become a 2/3. Excuse me, I apologize. Then, now if it happens to be bounced or reset or whatever, then it will come back into play with the 1 mastery still refreshed, as well as the 9. If you manage to make it up to 9, then we'll trigger that as well. And then that's it. You can't do anything unless it dies, you bring it back, or it's bounced, etc. But sometimes, much like that Interloper I mentioned earlier, which I'll see if I can bring it up real quick while I'm talking, they sometimes encourage or help trigger themselves, if that makes sense, because the initial will make the unit bigger. So if we can use that, so Brutish Interloper is the one I'm talking about. It is a 2/4 warrior at uncommon for 3 and a blue. And once again, I'll go more in depth into these cards in the set review. But it has Reckless, but it has Mastery 6, +1/+1, and Overwhelm. So if it somehow manages to deal 6 damage, it becomes a 3/5, which will then change its next mastery at 12, give it a +3/+3 in Berserk, from 3 attacks to 2 attacks, if that makes sense. So if nothing happens to Interloper and it just attacks, maybe blocks the turn it comes into play, it would have to deal damage 3 times to hit that first mastery. Once it does that, it becomes 3 power, and so it only takes 2 more hits of damage to get it up to mastery. So some things like that will happen. Mastery seems to be a pretty fun mechanic thus far. It does create some interesting lines of play as far as, you know, whether you attack, whether you're blocked, you try to trigger mastery, and then it kind of plays similar to Onslaught, except or really you don't know, because you don't know if they're attacking because they have a trick or if they simply want to trigger the mastery, or same things with blocks. So it does play out similar to Onslaught as far as whether to block or attack, but other than that, yeah, it's pretty straightforward mechanic, nothing much to it. Haven't seen, at least in this format, too much of bounce effects to reset. I mean, it does happen occasionally, but most of the time you're just working to that goal and then the unit stays on the board. One last thing I do want to mention about mastery is that any kind of invulnerable to damage effects will negate mastery, i.e. presumably metal in this format right now. If a unit has metal on it, or metal is casted on it, it gives it invulnerability to damage. The unit that is dealing the damage will not do damage to that unit, so your mastery will not trigger because it did not do damage. But yeah, just something to think about, especially when you're using pump spells and stuff like that. Like, obviously metal ends up being just a good combat trick, but the fact that if you were counting on hitting that mastery to make your unit bigger, that could potentially affect your strategy a little bit, but just something to consider. Alright guys, that is going to do it for mastery. Overall, seems pretty exciting. I am looking forward to playing with it. Moving right along to our next one, we have Muster. Muster seems to be exclusively in Elysian colors, so i.e. Time and Primal. To trigger Muster, you have to play an attachment and a spell in the same turn. So what it means is, a couple of things to cover about Muster is that first off, attachment, which I did do some hard testing, does cover curses, so attachments you place on your enemy, relics or relic weapons, so attachments you place on yourself, and weapons, so attachments you place on your unit. So things like permafrost and the torture, curse, torture, and permafrost being a curse, those both count towards the attachment side of muster. Things like obviously seek power, char, and you name it, flame blast count towards, or wisdom of the elders counts towards the spell portion of muster. And then obviously self-explanatory, weapons, anytime like Heretic's Cannon or Oni Warhorn, things like that you place on your units counts as attachment, and then any relic weapons or relics you place on yourself counts as an attachment as well. One interaction that is of note for clarification purposes is if you are playing a card like Xenon Initiation, which is a spell that gives one of your units killer, it is playing a spell on the unit, not a weapon. So it will count towards the spell side of muster, but not the attachment side. Now, the muster can only be triggered once per turn, which means and spellmaster. I'm sorry. Spellcraft weapons. There you go. Sorry about that. I do apologize. That was the first one I was gonna bring up, but I ended up almost not bringing it up at all. So spellcraft weapons does a good job of triggering both sides of muster. So we will see what kind of support this gets in the upcoming format, if it is more represented or represented about as equally as it is now in this one. But spellcraft weapons do count as long as you activate the spellcraft as both, because you're playing a weapon on one of your units or yourself, and obviously casting a spell with the spellcraft. So it's pretty much going to be the primary and most mainstream way to activate muster. Now, muster can only be activated once per turn. So that means, let's say for example, you end up playing seek power to go get a sigil, and then you play a heavy axe, right? Something cheap. You play a heavy axe on one of your units. That will trigger muster, and all your units, all of them, will trigger muster because they met that requirement. Now, let's say in that same turn, you somehow play a unit, you have a Shigain Forge, and you end up drawing another weapon. So you're like, okay, char your small flyer and put a heavy axe on my big flyer to get through, right? If it happened the same turn that you just played the seek power in, then it will not trigger, and it just no value. It will just play out the way it plays out. Now, that being said, you can play muster every single turn. So all you would simply do is do your initial seek power and heavy axe on one of your units, trigger the muster, and then wait till the following turn to do your char and your heavy axe. Now, the one thing I was not able to confirm, which may or may not, off the top of my head, I don't think there's any weapons. Oh wait, yeah. So that's the one thing. Ooh, that is something to test for. I might have to test that out. Let me know if you test it before. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna pause right now and test it. Be right back. All right, guys, so I totally just confirmed it with Kasul Elite. Yes, if you're able to make your weapons operate at fast speed and you play a spell, like for example, envelope bouncing an opponent's attacking unit back into their hand, and play an Echo Blade or whatever at fast speed, it will trigger muster. So you can trigger muster on both your turn and your opponent's turn, but you can only trigger muster once per turn. There's a super cool animation that happens when one half of the muster has been triggered. It's like kind of little temporal runes start spinning around the unit. That lets you know. It doesn't say, I don't believe they were different whether you played an attachment or a spell. I think it's just if you've triggered half of it, it lets you know, hey, you're one spell or attachment away from triggering muster. So yeah, you can trigger muster on each turn So not just yours, but obviously you have to jump through a little bit of hoops playing Kasul Elite is pretty much the only card that comes to mind. So a couple things we're looking at. At the common level, you have Wanderlust, which is the 1/1 Kirin at common for 2-time primal. It has flying, and then Muster +1/+1. So essentially you can just keep pumping this guy up. Obviously slapping, for example, a spellcraft weapon on him will get them the bonus stats as well as the additional +1/+1 that you can continue to career. One of the major payoffs that I like so far is Green Stretch Empath, which is a 3/5 druid at uncommon for 5 and a primal, and then its muster ability is draw 2 cards. So essentially you can start drawing extra cards. One, at base level it will replace themselves, right? Which is still a pretty good deal because you're getting the effects of the weapon and the spell and then drawing 2 cards. The flip side is obviously if you do it with things like a spellcraft weapon, then you're going up a card because you're going up 2 cards technically because you're getting a card off of the spell from the spellcraft. You're only playing the weapon, you're getting a free spell off that, and then you're drawing 2 cards, one to replace the weapon and one as an additional card since you didn't pay anything for the spellcraft. So yeah, this card's pretty strong, I think, but seems kind of neat. One last one that they have on the actual page is Nash Unrelenting. It's a 4/4 warrior at legendary for 3 time, and Muster. Nash gets +3/+3 this turn. Your other units are invulnerable to damage this turn. So pretty much as far as strategy goes, Muster is just another triggered ability that happens. Some are permanent, some are till end of turn, some are instant, but yeah. Overall, it looks like it seems like pretty interesting mechanic. Like obviously it's going to depend on how supported this type of mechanic is. Playing the pre-release event or the preview event. I believe it's preview. Preview event. It does have some synergy and can run away with a game if you have several musters in play, but I do like it. I do think the inherent value is there. Of course, like I said earlier, it might have some restriction on it, i.e. your power. You may not be able to play both things at the same time, or timing restrictions. Obviously, like for example, if it would be most beneficial to play 2 spells this turn because you need to remove a unit and pump one of yours, and the next turn play a spell, essentially that kind of changes up the dynamic a little bit. So that I think the restriction in Muster is going to make it a little difficult to play around, but the rewards and benefits are definitely there, at least from what I saw from the pre-release event. And obviously having things like the empath there that draw you cards, drawing 2 cards somewhat for free or tacked onto other spells is pretty awesome. So interested to see how Muster plays out. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Muster. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next mechanic is Decimate. Decimate is a new way to power up your cards from Flame of Xulta. When you play a card with Decimate, you may permanently spend 1 maximum power to increase its potency. So what this means is, I guess I'll finish Cast into Shadow is a relatively simple card with Decimate. No matter what you're spending 3 power to kill an enemy unit or curse. Then you are presented with a choice. You can choose to permanently lose 1 maximum power to kill an additional enemy unit or curse of the same faction. So, to break down the card in question, Cast into Shadow is a fast spell at rare for 3 green shadow. Kill an enemy unit or curse with a single faction. Decimate, then kill an additional enemy unit or curse with a single faction. So you eat up when you cast a spell, the way it works out in game, it plays out similar to shifted units, where even if the spell itself targets when you first play it, you just drop it out on the battlefield, give you move it to the right or to the left, whether to decimate or not. If you move it, if you don't decimate, then it just does what the first line of text does, i.e. kill an enemy unit or curse with a single faction. If you select decimate, then it will eat up your maximum power. So if you're at 5, you'll go down to 4. If you're at 7, you'll go down to 6. If you're at 2, you go down to 1. Then it will also allow you to do the decimate ability. So another card that does this is Draw Strength. It is a fast spot common for 1 and a green. Give one of your units a +1/+1 this turn for each enemy unit. Decimate, the top 3 units of your deck get a +1/+1. So you could pay this regardless of what you do. This is always going to cost 1. Now the question is whether you wanted to spend the additional back or lose the maximum power. So again, it doesn't matter. The power you decimate can be depleted already, so you can tap out, leaving only 1 power left. And then when you play Draw Strength, you are able to still play it for the 1, your last remaining undepleted power, and then still decimate. Overall, I like decimate. I feel like anytime you're able to use expended or additional power in some form or fashion, even if it is permanently, it does kind of mitigate a little bit of the damage of flooding potentially. It does pose some interesting decision points when you have the option of decimating early, so when you're only at 3 or 4 power, you have to figure out if decimate is worth it or not. So, but obviously it's an easy decision when your deck operates at like 5 or 6 power and you have 8 or 9, maybe not 9, even 7, but it is. I like it. I like decimate. I think it's a solid mechanic. I think it's going to definitely lead to some interesting decision trees early game or in development. But like I said, anytime you're able to use or make use of additional power, I think it's a good thing. So yeah, that's going to do it for decimate, guys. Pretty straightforward. Nothing much to it so far. As of note, it is on units as well from what I've seen. But yep, that's it. Exalted is next up on our list of mechanics for Flames of Xulta, and Exalted is a new battle skill that allows a fallen unit to pass its legacy onto an ally. When a unit with Exalted dies, you can play a weapon with its strength, health, and battle skills on one of your other units. Exalted itself is not passed on, though if you put the weapon on another unit that has Exalted, you will get to pass everything along again. So Exalted has proven to be quite interesting for limited. Extremely interesting, actually, because of the fact that you have to be careful with your removal, and it's also made silence effects become more valuable. So the base level, for example, they have Ardent Convert, which is a 1/1 cultist at common for 1 at a time. It just says Exalted. So when Ardent Convert dies, whether you sacrifice it, whether your opponent kills it, whether you chump block with it, immediately once it dies, you will get a trigger of a +1/+1 weapon, and you have to place on one of your units. So that's that. Pretty straightforward, right? Let's go up a little bit to Longtail Cavalry. This is a 2/1 uncommon unseen Kieran for 5 green. It has flying and Exalted. So this one's the more interesting one. If Longtail Cavalry dies for whatever reason, then you'll be able to place a +2/+1 weapon with flying on one of your units. So for example, in this current format, you're able to slap it on a Tremor Shocker, and then now all of a sudden you have an 8/7 flying Tremor Shocker. Like the example noted, any temporary buffs, the only thing the weapon from Exalted identifies is what the current stats are when the unit dies. It does not care that they're temporary, does not care that they are permanent, does not care that they're on a weapon or they're on the unit itself. Any stat line or battle skill that is on the unit when it dies will trigger with the Exalted. If you're attacking, once again, let's use Longtail Cavalry into their Shelluk Captain, right? The 5/5 flyer. If you attack into it and they decide they want to block, and you finest hour your cavalry, making it a 5/4 to trade with the captain, once the cavalry dies, instead of giving a +2/+1 in flying weapon, it actually will make a +5/+4 flying weapon. That is actually quite powerful and something to consider. It does the same thing for battle skills. So should you give a unit Berserk, right? Let's say, for example, you just have the covert or the convert that we talked about, the +1/+1. If you, for some reason, death from above it, and then it gains flying and berserk, and your opponent chars it, then you are able to give a +1/+1 and flying and berserk weapon to another one of your units. So now you can see why it starts to make limited pretty interesting and quite difficult to gauge, because it's like, okay, when do you kill the unit? Are you able to kill it? It makes things with like 0/3s a little more valuable, because you can chump block these exalted units, because a lot of these units that have the extra ability, like evasive units like flying, you kind of are perfectly okay with them just dying. Like, you want them to die so you can upgrade another unit. Exalted is on multiple things. So for example, there is Dramatic Exit, which is a slow spell. They give one of your units +4 attack, and Exalted, sacrifice it at the end of the turn. Of note, that Dramatic Exit does say sacrifice at the end of turn, but the +4/+0 and the Exalted are permanent. So you can essentially attack with it or whatnot, and then bouncing it back in your hand before the end of the turn, and you won't have to sacrifice it. But essentially you do want to, because then you want to upgrade those abilities to whatever other unit you have in play. So that's where Exalted is. Exalted is quite powerful. I think it is extremely strong. There are units that give Exalted. There are spells that give Exalted. So don't think that it is a parasitic keyword or mechanic. It's actually, I think, goes well in just about any format, because, yeah, units die. So that is Exalted. I feel like I had more for some of these, but clearly not. All right, guess we're going to be breezing through this one a little bit quicker than I thought. But overall, it does play more. Obviously, we'll go more in depth on unit-specific stuff in the set review. But overall, Exalted, you're happy to have it. Doesn't matter what kind of unit it is. Having it on the board just kind of gives you additional play. And like they said, if you give these additional bonuses or the weapon on another unit with Exalted, when it dies, it will identify or recognize those additional stats and will keep passing it along. Just to reiterate, it does not pass Exalted itself. So the weapon is not going to give another unit Exalted, but it will give it all the other stat lines. So just something to think about. It's not going to be one of those chains where you, like, your Exalted unit dies, you slap it on a bigger unit, then when that bigger unit dies, then it goes on. Nope, it's going to stop right there unless that bigger unit has Exalted. Next up, we have a cycle of new power, which does interact a little interesting. So I think it's worth mentioning here on the mechanics breakdown. I'm not necessarily sure if it would count as a mechanic or not, but we have emblems. So emblems are new power cards that can be a bit painful, but with serious upside for the truly dedicated. When you play Emblem of Kodosh, you will get +1 maximum power and justice influence and take 1 damage. Then, if you now have 3 or more justice influence, you get the choice to decimate and draw a unit. So Emblem of Kodosh is at rare power, gain 1 justice and take 1 damage. So base level, it is a power that deals 1 damage, right? You're like, why do I want this in my deck? It just has downside. I could just play a justice sigil. But it has decimate. If you have triple justice influence, create and draw a 1/2 wind elemental with flying. So what this means is, you'll play Emblem of Kodosh, right? You'll take 1 damage and gain 1 maximum power and gain 1 justice influence. Then, if you have at least 3 justice influence, you will have the choice to decimate it or not. If you decimate it, you obviously are sacking the +1 maximum power you just got. So you'll still have the maximum power for that turn. So if that, for example, if the emblem puts you at 3, you'll still keep 3 for that turn. But because, you know, it +1 undepleted. But you will lose at the end of the turn and you'll go back down to 2 for your next turn. Now, and then it changes, then it draws you a wind elemental unit. So essentially, the reason why you're paying the 1 damage for a Justice Sigil is whenever it is convenient for you. And once again, if you're flooding or if your deck operates, for example, at 4 power and you don't need that 5th or 6th power, if it is the emblem, you are able to net gain of 0, I guess, so to speak, or change it. That would be the best thing. You're just simply changing the power card into a unit. So once again, there's a full cycle. So you have, just to go over, they all do the exact same thing. They'll all give you a maximum power, +1 maximum power and influence of each specific faction, and you take a damage, and then you're able to decimate to get a unit. The units, real quick, for Justice, it is the 2/1 flying wind elemental, and they're all, by the way, they're all 2-cost units with triple faction. So the fire is triple fire, time is triple time. Fire one is Ash Elemental, which is a 3/3 elemental with overwhelm. Time is Earth Elemental, 2/2 exalted. Shadow is Death Elemental, 2/2 deadly. And Ice Elemental is a 3/1 8 with Aegis. So overall, not bad. I think them being rare is going to be interesting to see how often to see them in draft. But I do think, once again, anything that mitigates you flooding, I think, is always very valuable. And so I'm up there with emblems, because you are paying a cost. Don't get me wrong. As soon as you're going up against a mono red deck or Rakano, aggressive Rakano deck, you're going to wish you didn't have to take that 1 damage for your power. But I think the fact that you are able in the late game to make this into a unit that may or may not be relevant is quite beneficial. To combo off, one of the things just to mention as well, that it does add an additional decimate to your deck. And they have included cards in the set that are other units and spells and things that care about when you decimate or how many times you've decimated. So that will be something to consider. Sometimes you're just going to want the extra decimates for added value later on. But overall, like I said, I've yet to see a decimate card that I don't think I'm happy with the option of possibly decimating it. So yeah, overall, I think emblems are going to be a very interesting addition. Once again, you're not going to see a lot of them in limited, them being at rare, but they are a cycle in the set, so and operate a little intricately, so it was worth mentioning on the show. All right, our 5th mechanic is going to be bargain. When a card has bargain, it means that you can play it straight from your market under the right conditions. The bargain here is that if you hit your enemy with 2 or more Oni, you'll be able to play Press the Advantage from your market for the rest of the turn. The best part, you don't have to exchange any cards from your hand to do so. So, markets are back, ladies and gentlemen. So it is here to stay. If any of you, I know in Constructed, some people complain about merchants and smugglers and markets being a little too consistent for the game, but they're back, and that is some design and workspace that they want to explore. So as of right now, all the bargain cards or cards with bargain on them are rares, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to see it at common and uncommon level. But long story short, as it said pretty clearly, bargain simply means that the card that has bargain is able to be played from your market as long as a certain condition is met. From what I could see of the cycle right now, because once again, this is a 5-color cycle. It looks like they represent all 5 colors. That is tribal themed as far as the requirement. So 2 Onis have to hit, 2 elves have to hit, 2 Yetis have to hit, and so far they're all hitting the enemy player. Or yes, a cultist has to hit, a dragon has to hit. So the way this works is if a card has bargain. Now, once again, you don't have to put it in your market. You can 100% just put it in your deck and it operates just fine. For example, let's use the initial one that they just talked about. Press the Advantage is a 1 and a green slow spell. Give one of your units Aegis. And then obviously bargain, hit the enemy player with 2 or more Oni. So you can easily just have this in your deck and just play it as is. But if we've talked about on the show before, having additional cards in your deck without a price or paying the price to consistency is quite valuable, because then that means you have more cards to play against your opponent. So you could choose to play Press the Advantage in your market even without any merchants. As soon as you place it in your deck, you have the option of putting it in your market, as far as I'm aware of as the interaction, from what I can read from the article. Bargain cards introduce a new way to build your market. Previously, having a merchant or smuggler in your deck gave you access to a 5-card market of the same faction. Now, Having a bargain card in your deck does the same thing. For example, let's say you're brave enough to make a deal with a Yeti. What would you look? What would that look like? Yeah, I don't know. Anywho, in the deck builder, when you put Inspired Prank into your deck, you will see the market tab appear, which means that you can now build a market. You can go right ahead and add a copy of Inspired Prank there too. Let me see something real quick. Nope. All right. So there you go. So you are not required to have any merchants or smugglers to add a bargain card to your market. It simply sits there. Now, the only way you are able to access that is when you meet that condition. But like it said also in the ability, it does not require you to exchange a card out of your hand. So you are completely just gaining an additional card. They figure that they added the bargain requirement is probably enough to cause it to be worth a card to you. So that is bargain. I'm not going to go too in depth in it because obviously, like I said, I'm just seeing it a cycle at rare so far. As of the time of this recording, that's all that's been spoiled. But once again, it does give you an additional card that if you feel like you wouldn't mind playing, but it might not make quite the cut for your deck, you can simply play in the market. And in the game, when you hit those requirements or conditions, you're able to play it. If not, so be it. Once again, sometimes you'll be able to trigger it when you want to and sometimes will not. So you are paying a little bit of a price, and of course, I'm sure it would operate if there are merchants or markets or smugglers or merchants in the curated packs, then you are able to still access it from your market like you normally would. But once again, let's go over one other card. We'll talk about Draconic Ire. It is a slow spell for 3 and a fire. Kill an enemy attachment, then deal damage equal to its cost to the enemy player. Bargain. Hit the enemy player with a dragon. So if you have it in your main deck, you can easily just play it to destroy an attachment. And then let's say it's, for example, a Horn of the Harvest. It'll destroy the horn and then your opponent will take 5. If you have this in your market and you happen to hit them in the face with a dragon, because it does say enemy player for all of these, not just hit an opponent or a unit. When it hits the enemy player's face, then you have the option to play Draconic Ire for the rest of the turn for free. Or not for free, you still have to pay the cost. I'm sorry, that is, whoa, I'm glad I thought about that. You do have to pay the cost. It is not for free. It is simply allowing you to play it from your market. That's it. So yeah, that is bargain, guys. But of course, to the surprise of a lot of people, they did say we were going to have at least 5 new mechanics in this set, and they did also release the emblems. But today, so I'm glad I'm kind of waited, it was a 2-part series to record this podcast. We did get Invoke is another mechanic that was released. So let's go ahead and dive right into Invoke, shall we? Invoke is a new mechanic that allows you to channel the power of the ancestors, i.e. Kodosh, Makar, all that, as far as for you lore people. When you invoke a faction strength, you are presented with 3 cards from the faction, a spell, a unit, and an attachment. You then choose to draw one of these 3 potential blessings. So imagine the idea of the cargoes turning into contraband. So when you play the contraband, it gives you 3 random spells, one of each faction that cargo was. This is similar to that, except it is mono faction. These are all legendary, but that doesn't mean that that's all that's spoiled so far. So it does not mean we're not going to see it on commons or uncommons. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's essentially drawing you a card and a card of your choice somewhat. So it seems really powerful, but it is a mechanic and I'm going to bring it up because they're still legendaries in draft. So here we have Incarnis, Makar's Listener. She is a 3/3 mystic at legendary for 4 shadow. So the full cycle all cost 4. They're all units and they all require triple influence of their respective faction. Incarnis is unblockable, and then it says summon, invoke, shadow influence, or at least the pip for it, the icon, and then mastery 9 +3/+3 and invoke another shadow. So right off the bat, Incarus with a little bit of work can draw you 2 cards. So her, and then draw you 2 additional cards. So when you play Incarnus, the little card window will pop up and you will get three random cards. The example that they have on the page. Now, once again, it did say you get a spell, a unit, and an attachment. So you get one of each style of card or type of card, but the cards themselves are random. So here we have Swear Vengeance as the spell. We have the Slime Spitter Slug as the unit, and then a Life Drinker as the relic weapon as the attachment, I should say. There you go. Of note, they did make it a point to show you that there's a common, a rare, and an uncommon. So obviously the sky's the limit as far as what you could get out of this. You can get a legendary all the way down to a common. Some say that the game kind of adjusts it, so it's stuff that does fit the situation somewhat, mainly with a good idea at the time. A lot of people are really high on that card, because they say it typically adjusts to give them what they really need at that point. Whether that's true or not, I'm not 100%. I have not done research to look up literature that might actually confirm that, but you know, to each their own. But this does still draw you a card, and there are chances where it becomes relevant. So that is Invoke. Pretty straightforward. Long story short, once again, if a card has Invoke, whenever you play it, it will allow you to pick one of 3 cards of that respective faction, one being a spell, one being a unit, and one being an attachment. So yeah, let's find out how this plays out. But that is going to do it for the mechanics, guys. Overall, Flames of Xulta is looking extremely fun and exciting with all the cards that have been spoiled. It's hard to say how intricate or difficult or complex the format's going to be, because like I said, both Invoke and Bargain and Emblems have all been on higher rarity cards as far as what's been spoiled yet. And it's kind of interesting that the muster mechanic is the only one that was not represented in all 5 colors, at least at the time of this recording. So it's pretty interesting that all the other mechanics, they were okay spreading across 5 colors or 5 factions, but then one of the 6 they decided to keep only in 2 factions. So quite interesting as far as game design goes. I guess we'll have to see the entire set to find out. But those are the mechanics. If there are any kind of interactions you guys have questions about, or that I might have missed on the show, by all means, leave them in the comments down below, or hit me up live on stream every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday at Jedi_EJ on twitch.tv. Also, actually, I'll worry about that at the end of the show. But that's it. That's going to do it for the mechanics, at least at the time of this recording, once again, because they told us it was going to be a minimum of 5, and they did give us a 6th mechanic plus the emblems. So who knows what else is left for Flames of Xulta. That also being said, because I don't think they've spoiled the whole set, I was not able to do my little slight number crunching plan that I have for it. So that will probably be included at the beginning of the next episode, which should be the commons and uncommon set review. So make sure you guys get ready for that one, because that one's going to be a long one. So with the end of our mechanics breakdown comes our what's the play of the week. So we have 2 this week. First one does come from the Flames of Xulta pre-release draft format. This one is a little interesting. We are going up against our opponent that is at 3 power, 3 of 0. They are Combre, so Time Justice. They are at we are, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to do the mirror thing because I think that worked out so far from the feedback. Let's see. They have a 3/3 Svetia's Faithful, a 3/4 Auric Lookout that is shifted 2, and a 2/3 Auric Lookout with Endurance that's just on the board. We are at 5 of 5 with Fire and Shadow being our influence. So our opponent's at 3 power, we are at 5 power. Our opponent is at 11 life, we are at 9 life. They have 3 units on the board. Svetia's Faithful, 3/4 shifted 2 ticks Auric Lookout, and a 2/3 Endurance Auric Lookout on the board. We have a 2/2 or a 3/2 Shadow Evangel with quick draw, a 2/1 Totmite with quick draw and Exalted, and then we have a shifted with 1 tick 2/3 Outfitter, which is the reason why our other 2 units are buffed +1 attack. Once again, we're at 9 life. Our opponent has 6 cards in hand. We have 4 cards in hand in the form of Eviscerate, the Rallying Sergeant, the 4/4 for 5 that gets a +4 or +3 if you onslaught. The Devouring Shadow or Devouring Grasp, I think it is, the 3 cost, 3 and a shadow slow spell that deals -X equal to your shadow influence, and then a Daring Maneuver, the +2/+2 Overwhelm for 2 and a red. So my question here is, what's the play? There's a lot of lines to this, to be honest with you. We could Eviscerate, we could attack to play Rallying Sergeant, we could remove something with the Devour and then try to remove something with the Daring Maneuver. We could not attack. There's multiple things we could do here. So it is tough. I do recommend, if the board is a little hard to follow, by all means check out the video on YouTube so you can see it on the screen. What I decide on doing here is I attack first to allow my opponent to make the decision for me. So I went ahead and attacked. I believe I attacked with both units, both the 3/2 Evangel with quick draw and the 2/2 Totmite with quick draw. And then if my opponent blocked, I was going to use the Daring Maneuver to kill their Auric Lookout and then play the Devouring Shadows on the Svetya's Faithful to keep their board clear. If I attacked and they did not block and my units simply went through, then I would have played the Rallying Sergeant. I like the idea of allowing my opponent to make the decision, because if I am able to, either way, both options or all 3 options allowed me to maximize the use of my power. And it alleviated a little bit of the thought process for me. If I had tried to figure out, like, okay, I definitely want to Rallying Sergeant, and that is perfectly fine, there's nothing wrong with that, then you could essentially only attack with the Evangel, the 3/2 Evangel. Obviously, the opponent would not block, so you would get him for 3, take him down to 8, and then play the Rallying Sergeant and still have the Daring Maneuver and the for it the next turn. And you have the option, obviously, of the Totmite dying to give quick draw. I believe I went ahead and I was okay with both options, to be perfectly honest with you. Especially seeing that our opponent was stuck on power, I think I was okay keeping the board clear. So thus why I attacked with both units. They did obviously try to block the Totmite, so I went with the Daring Maneuver on the Totmite to kill their Lookout, and then, having nothing else to do with our power, took out the Svetya's Faithful. So we did lose a little bit of tempo there, as far as not being able to further develop our board with a 7/4, but I do think the fact that keeping my opponent's board fairly open, relatively open, led to me still being aggressive, especially with them at such a low life total. So that was what's the play number 1. What's the play number 2 actually comes off of the pre-release or preview event, where players were given 1 of 5 pre-constructed decks using the cards from Flame of Xulta, and they all battled it out. So in this one, I was going up against the Recano deck, and I was playing the Elysian Muster deck, which is good. That's another reason why I did play it for pick it for the what's the play. So our opponent is at 2 of 6 power Recano, so Fire Justice. We are at 5 of 8 power with Elysian, so Time and Primal. They are at 6 life. We are at 12 life. They have 2 cards in hand. We have 2 cards in hand in the form of Primal Sigil and Seek Power. The board state as is a 4/4 green Evangel, so it has lifesteal, and it gets the +2/+2 because it has Warhorn. So Warhorn, when the unit deals damage to opponent, you get a 2/2 Oni for 2. They have the legendary Oni, I forgot her name, but At the time, she is a 7/6 with Exalted. She has some more text to her, but it was irrelevant at this point. And then they have the, once again, forgive me for the names, I'm lacking right now, but they have a Oni that's permafrosted, and it has Exalted by permafrosted, but it's yeah, that's it. Actually, I don't think it was the one that pumps everything else. Maybe it was. Maybe it is the Oni that pumps it, and that's why the legendary is a 7/6 instead of a 6/6. I'm not 100% sure. I do apologize about that part. On our end, we have the Kieran Drake that we talked about earlier, which is the 2/1 flyer with muster +1/+1. So we have two of those, and one of them has a weapon on it, and I've pumped it, so it is actually a 4/7. So we have a 4/7 flyer, a 2/1 flyer that are both exhausted. Our opponent is attacking us. Sorry, that might have confused you a little bit. I'll go over it again. So let me break down the board state, and then I'll say what the actions are. Sorry about that, guys. So our opponent has a 4/4 lifesteal with draw a 2/2 Oni when it deals damage to us, and a 7/6 exalted Oni. Our board is a 4/7 flyer with muster, a 1/2 flyer with muster, the new Sodi, so the 3/3 with, at the beginning of our turn, we get to draw an additional card, and every time we muster, we reset or refresh all our power. And then the 3/3 with muster, make a 4/4 that has charge and dies at the end of the turn. Our two Drakes are exhausted, so we only have our two 3/3s to block, and our opponent is attacking us with both units. Again, they are at 6, we are at 12. We have a Seek Power and a Primal Sigil in hand. So what would you do here? Our options are double block the lifesteal unit to allow them to go up to 10, and we lose one of our units, and they go up, and they lose their lifesteal and do not get an additional 2/2, and we take 7 going down to 5. We can chump block both. They go up to 10, we stay at 12, and we lose both our units. We can double block the Exalted Oni, killing both our units, and then giving the +7/+6 to their lifesteal unit. Or we could simply not block, take it, go down to 1 in hopes that they don't have a pump spell, and then we have our highest chance of just killing them on the crackback, because they are going to go up to 10, and we have over 10 power on the board. So of note here, once again, remember I did say that if the 4/4 hits us, they do get a 2/2 Oni Ronin, and they have 2 power undepleted, so they are able to, if they don't have the pump spell to kill us, then they are able to play a chump blocker to essentially stop us from having lethal on the crackback. So what would you do here? I decided to go ahead and take a chance. With high risk comes high reward, and I don't see us beating a 4/4 lifesteal or a 7/6 with Exalted, especially if they're about to draw another 2/2 if we don't have something going on. Considering the fact that I already have 1/2 of muster in my hand, and this deck was built to play around muster, I decided to take my chance and hope that the top 2 cards, one of the top 2 cards of our deck, would get us out of this. And so, of course, of note, I could always leave the 4/7 back to block the following turn, but because I don't, and I don't want to risk A, losing Sodi that draws us the additional card, and B, the 3/3 that has the ability to win us the game off of the 4/4. So I think it gave us the highest chance of winning, and we required it if they were going to have a chump blocker. If they had a spell, we were just dead anyways. They ended up not having a spell, so we went down to 1. They had no pump spell, and then as expected, they played their 2/2 Oni as a chump blocker, putting us off of lethal. We drew the first card, which I don't remember what it was, and then the second card was a permafrost. The permafrost counts as the attachment for muster, and we placed that obviously on the Exalted 7/6. Both of them were exhausted. And then we played, or no, actually I take that back, I'm sorry, we just went ahead because they were tapped out. We put it on the Oni, and then I played the Seek Power, being the spell portion of muster, which triggered mustard on all my units, to include making the 4/4 elemental with charge, and we swung in for lethal. So that being said, once again, understand that might have not been the correct play because they easily could have had a plum spell to kill us, but high risk, high reward, I felt like that was correct line. But guys, that is the what's the plays of the week, which rolls into our final segment. For our constructed corner this week, Death3366 has created a very interesting card deck in the form of Build Your Own Macto. Macto has been a card that's bounced in and out of constructed from time to time based on how the removal and the format looks, and it's extremely powerful because he has not only revenge, but his revenge never ends. Literally, he just keeps coming back and back and back again. And so, with some interesting cards and abilities in the form of Exalted, we see Macto coming back. So once again, shout out to Death3366 for helping this part of the show with creating this deck. I've played this deck a little bit myself and is a lot of fun. It plays a little bit like the old Crown / Clockroach, there we go. Clockroach deck, but a little more mainstream and a little more higher end, top end. So let me go ahead and break down the deck for you. It is 4 Seek Power, 4 Devour, 4 Immortalize, which is the new card from Flame of Xulta, 2 Vara's Favor, 2 Island's Choice, 4 Hidden Road Smuggler, which is the Argentport, 4 Rhyme Conclave Smuggler, which is the Huru, 3 Slay, 4 Stone Powder Alchemist, which is one of my personal favorite cards, 4 Wisdom of the Elders, 4 Harsh Rule, 4 Macto, 4 Caiaphas the Wandering King, which is the promo card that came out a long time ago, the neutral 6 cost 5/5, and summon Caiaphas gets 3 random battle skills, and 2 Korovat Palaces, 2 Justice Sigil, 2 Primal Sigil, 2 Shadow Sigil, 2 Cobalt Waystone, 4 Crest of Cunning, 4 Crest of Order, 4 Crest of Vengeance, 2 Seeds of Cunning, 1 Seed of Order, 3 Seed of Vengeance, and then the market consists of Vision of Austerity, Feeding Time, Honor of the Fallen, which is give one of your units the battle skills of each unit in your void, which will come into play later, Regent's Tomb, and End of the Story. So the something I was gonna say and just skipped me. Oh yeah. So one thing to say about Caiaphas is it does get all the new battle skills off of Flames of Xulta to include Exalted, which means should Caiaphas die, he will place a weapon that includes his stat line, so 5/5 minimum, and all 3 of his abilities on another unit. Well, except for Exalted, sorry. So if he gets, like, for example, Lifesteal and Unblockable and Exalted, the weapon will give the other unit Lifesteal and Unblockable. So the deck itself revolves around reoccurring Macto and the Wandering and Caiaphas, giving them additional battle skills and capitalizing on each time they come into play and die. So the Merchants and the Stone Powder Alchemist play 2 roles in this deck. First, they are cannon fodder for aggressive decks. They chump block to essentially get extend the game into the late, mid, and late game where you will capitalize. And then they also offer as key battle skills that go to the void, which you can later use Honor the Fallen to give to either Caiaphas or Macto, primarily and preferably Macto, because he will continue to reoccur. In this, it is really important to try to trigger the onslaught on the Rhyme Conclave Smuggler, so it has Aegis, so that's another thing that goes to the void. So essentially what you want to do is when one of these units go to the void, you decimate Immortalize, giving them Exalted, and then when they die and go back to the void later in the game, when you have to honor the fallen Macto, then you will give him Exalted as well. So now every time he dies, he's giving a +5/+5 weapon and all his battle skills, to include Revenge, to another unit. And so you can see where this cycle can get pretty nutsy, where you're just reoccurring Mactos with all kinds of abilities and Caiaphas's, and obviously Caiaphas, every time he comes back, gets an additional 3 battle skills, so he can be absolutely ridiculous. So it could be a lot of fun, and obviously that's the best way to give Macto Exalted, because of the fact that he will not stay in the void. So Immortalize is where it happens and why you want these units in your void. One thing to note, if you immortalize the Alchemist, because it will have Destiny/Revenge on it, it will draw you a card. The Immortalize will draw, quote unquote, draw it from the void. It will trigger Destiny, go into play, do the +2/-2 damage, or drain your opponent for 2, and then draw you a card off the top. So there's some really interesting synergies there, and it ends up being a lot of fun. I ended up beating a Huru Control because I immortalized several alchemists and just outvalued them that way, to include breaking their rune hammer. And you get 2 units. It's super fun. The deck has some interesting play to it. Obviously, giving him Exalted, giving Caiaphas Exalted as well, is pretty powerful, much like I talked about earlier. So you kind of want them to die and reoccur, because that's where you start to kind of gain your value in this deck, is just slowly but surely wearing your opponent out by forcing them to use cards on these units that are huge threats that you can reoccur. You do run Devour in the deck to put the Merchants and Alchemist in the void, while also drawing you cards, but it also protects your Macto and Caiaphas from removal that might essentially take them out, like, for example, in Cold Blood, or Equivocate, or Feeding Time. The things that will essentially break that chain is you keep up Devour to not only draw the cards, but protect them, so you can just sack Macto before the Feeding Time can transform him into a pig. The deck does very well. Once again, its tough matchups are the aggressive decks as well as the control decks with Royal Decree, mainly because Royal Decree takes out the biggest engine, which is either Macto and or Caiaphas. I think the aggressive decks, you have a decent matchup. They can essentially, if your cards don't line up correctly, be a little too slow for you or too fast for you, and so you fall behind. But as long as you do get like 1 or 2 Merchants and an Alchemist on the board, that is normally long enough to bridge the gap for you to harsh rule or drop a Caiaphas or Macto with lifesteal, or be able to block and things like that. Board wipes do help quite a bit, and like I said, Royal Decree is just the bane of any kind of deck that kind of relies on 1 or 2 units or spells to make things happen. But overall, keeping Face Aegis up does help mitigate that, and you do have market tech, i.e. in the form of like Regent's Tomb, to essentially end the story, to wipe the board even through Aegis and take out key cards from their deck, and you survive a board wipe. But once again, the most fun you can have with this deck is putting an Honor of the Fallen on Macto with like a lifesteal and Aegis and Exalted, because then every time he dies, he's giving another unit +5/+5 and flying and revenge and lifesteal and Aegis, and so it is absolutely bonkers and a ton of fun. I highly recommend this deck if you definitely want to kind of see what kind of crazy engines you can get and high roll, because obviously Caiaphas is a huge high roll. Sometimes you get 3 abilities that are 100% relevant, sometimes you get abilities that do absolutely nothing, and then everything in between. But overall, a fun deck. I did enjoy it. Like I said, every once in a while someone will roll a decree you and it just kind of ruins your game plan, but such is life. That's why the card's in the set. But that is it for our constructed corner, which means that's the end of our show. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the Flames of Xulta mechanic breakdown. Hope you got a little something from this. I do hope I was able to answer some of your questions. If you have any more questions or have an interaction that I might have missed with any of these new mechanics, by all means, let me know on the Discord, live on Twitch, or in the comments below so I can pass it on to the rest of the community. You can follow me at Twitter at EJthePodcast. All right, and definitely check out. I post whenever I go live, whenever I post new videos, whenever new podcasts go up. Check out all this content to include the video version of this podcast at EJthePodcast, or search Eternal Journey on the search bar on YouTube. You can follow all my real life stuff at Instagram at CaesarLabear7. And then finally, you can catch me streaming live every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday mornings at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. Shout out once again to all my supporters and all the great people out there that are allowing this to happen. And if you're tuning into this Sunday, I guess it's going to be too late because this podcast comes out the day I do the Cube Draft. So hopefully you were able to catch the post on Reddit or on Twitter or on Discord and are able to participate. And if you're not, definitely let me know. Or if you did, let me know what you think about it. If you saw it on stream, if you enjoyed it, if you want me to try to do this again. And we'll see if hopefully that might be another format that Direwolf Digital adds to the game or client that we can do. If not, I'll keep trying to improve on it on my own end and make it happen if it is something you guys want to continue to see. But all right, guys, I do apologize once again for the sniffles and all the awkward voice things as I was mouth breathing through half this episode due to allergies. Hopefully I'll be fine for the set review show. If not, oh boy, it's gonna be a doozy. But that's gonna do it. Thank you guys so much. Until next time, happy gaming.